So, was your worst time in ministry also your best? Mine was. Today, I want to share with you a continuing story of my journey. A little bit of overview from 2004. We may or may not get to 2010. We'll see how far I'm able to share because I don't like having these videos too long. So, I've been gone for a minute. I had a work trip to Hong Kong that interrupted my life in terms of preparation and coming back, but was a lovely conclusion to my time there that I will eventually share more about. But right now, I want to take us back. It's 2004. I'm at the International House of Prayer. My mom, my dad, my younger sister had just been sent out by our church at the time with two friends to start a house church. My dad had actually communicated with that pastor from the beginning that his dream was to start his own ministry in Hong Kong, that his whole vision was about trying to implement a biblically faithful, as much as possible tradition-free experience of church that would meet in a house, that would be started by a church planter, that leadership would be raised up among locals, and that the church planting team would then, which consisted of mostly my family, would then move on to start another church. And they got this going while I was gone at the House of Prayer. And I very quickly realized when I returned from the House of Prayer that this was where I was meant to be. And slowly over time, this vision became mine. So our focus was definitely inner healing first. We wanted to get the small number of people that attended as healed up as possible. And we also wanted depth in prayer because our dream was a free church where everyone could use all their gifts. And we knew that a healthy use of gifts required a certain level of healing with each person. And we did. So our church format at the time is something that I have never experienced anywhere. I experienced bits and pieces in other churches, but never this in its entirety. We would have pre-service prayer, which just involved people who wanted to be together, asking Holy Spirit to come. And then we would have a meal together, a love feast, if you will. It was a potluck that my family hosted every time. Then we would all pray together, asking God what his purpose was for the meeting. Now, Mom, Dad, Mariah, myself, we all would have some idea of what we might do if nobody heard anything, but it never happened. There was never a prayer meeting where as a group, we didn't know the focus. A church meeting, I should say. There was never a church meeting where we didn't know the focus. So some weeks we, would have all worship. Some weeks we would have prayer. Some weeks was a Bible study. We did have an extra Bible study to make sure enough teaching was going. And eventually we did grow to 3 or 4 families, and we had multiple meetings. At one point, we had an elderly ministry where my mom and my younger sister would meet elderly people who could not come into the home. We had a youth gathering for young people who weren't comfortable with families. Children attended and were fully a part of the service. We had open worship, it's called. So I was the worship leader. My responsibility was to keep everyone on pitch. And eventually we did have a songbook, so people could sing out a song, but more often they would pick one out of the songbook so that I could play in the key, and then there were 2 other people on keyboard and guitar, was as far as it went, but it was still free flowing. I didn't pre-select any songs. I didn't ask God in advance for any themes. That all happened together as a church because our hope was to have everybody involved, like in First Corinthians, where each person has a song, a hymn, a word of exhortation. We'd hot seat each other in prayer and ask God for words for each other. Um, there was a lot of beauty in it, I would say. And at our highest peak, we had a season of extraordinary miracles. Everything from unexpected provision to physical healing to an unbeliever and her husband having gold dust poured on them out of thin air, resulting eventually in their salvation. Like we had someone on public transport running an urgent errand get there faster than they should have, just a number of ways that as a result, I believe, of the freedom we gave Holy Spirit, that Holy Spirit showed up for us. And initially in this context, I experienced a whole lot of relief because I had felt that in other ministry experiences, I was consistently being pushed to move and operate in gifts that weren't my strengths. Although I realized that at that point, I believe that was probably my primary source of burnout. I came to learn later that it was not, but I'm jumping ahead. My husband tends to say when he hears me, I mean, he knew me in this season, but not like, of course, we know each other now. We were acquaintances. We weren't really friends, and my parents knew him better at the time. But he says that when I talk about this season, it sounds like it's the glory days. And I would say even to this day, my standard of what I experience as a really good church experience tends to have some element of what I experienced in our house church. Now, there were some drawbacks, okay? One thing that I discovered is when you have a small church and there's an issue with one person, it's extraordinarily impactful to everybody. There was very much if one suffers, everybody suffers. Small things tended to get amplified. And there was also a certain dynamic related to personality and language ability that I ended up being the person who did the most confrontation of issues, which had me after a point feeling like a church bad guy. So it wasn't all glory and wonder. And I would say we also had a season where my family was not particularly effectively boundaried in terms of our time. So at one point we went 3 months without a single day off. And this lent itself to a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of rumination, even as a group where we were just always hashing and rehashing things we were concerned about. And all of that did eventually culminate in a set of circumstances that I will not make public, that had my family asking the question, is this meant to continue? And at that point, we had been going 6 years, and God said, this church has served its purpose. You can close it down. It's been years later that I've seen all that God did, not only in my family, but I would say in each individual member of the church that we were a part of, that I can see despite its closure, which externally could look like failure, that actually our church was very important in bringing some individuals into the kingdom that would have never been otherwise. And also bringing people to a higher level in God that they then took into other churches where they have been a blessing. So it was a painful season. That church closure for me was, felt like another series of ministry failures. I had poured out everything I had to give. And between the church closure and a situation I will talk about briefly in the next video, I ended the whole thing pretty burned out.